In today's episode of the simulator series, we are going to be creating the Rebirth Gui. As always, if you guys do enjoy the video, make sure you smash the like button, also the subscribe button, and turn post notifications on if you want to get notified when I upload more Roblox development content. Additionally, we have a Patreon. If you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I make during this episode, there's a link down below in the description, and you guys can go and check that out. With that being said, let's get right into it. Real quick, before we actually get into creating the GUI, we've recently added more icons to our clicking simulator GUI assets that you guys can all access for free. There's a link down below in the description to the page. You guys can go there and download the zip file, which contains all of the different icons and assets that we've created. So now that we have those assets, I'm going to go inside of Studio, click on View, and open up the Asset Manager. Then I'm going to go to the bulk import, and I'm going to add all the brand new icons. After a couple of seconds, we should see that they've all been imported, which is perfect. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of the Star GUI. I'm going to go into the click buttons first, and then we're going to update these images. So currently right here, if we click on this image button, we can see that we have an image set for that. And what we actually want to use is the clicker button icon. So we're going to grab that image ID, paste it just like that, and now that's good. And then also for this image, we actually want to change it from stretch to fit, just like that. So now it looks pretty perfect. And then we just have to do it for our auto clickers as well. So image, set the image to the clicker ID, and then also change the scale type from stretch to fit, just like that. And there we go. Those images all look good, and they've now been updated. We also want to go inside of the left GUI, inside of the frame, open up the currency, then go into the clicks, and then we have this currency image label right here. We want to update that currency image label with the clicks currency icon. So we'll grab that ID, paste it just like that. There we go. And let's make sure that we set the scale type to fit. We see it's now set to fit, and now that looks good. We'll also do the same thing for gems. So come inside of here, grab the currency label. Then we need to make sure that we copy the gems currency icon ID just like that, paste it in there, update it. Boom, that's good. Let's make sure that we set the scale from stretch to fit, and perfect. All those icons have been updated, which is great. Now that we've updated those icons, we can actually start creating the Rebirth GUI. So we're going to go inside of the Star GUI and add a brand new screen GUI. We're going to rename this from screen GUI to Rebirth. And then also for the properties, we want to ignore the GUI inset, disable resetting on spawn, and then also set the Z and X behavior to global. After that, we would put a frame inside of here. And for the sizing, we're going to set this to 0.2, 0, 0.5, 0, just like that. And then for the positioning, we want it to be pretty much centered on the screen. So we're going to say 0.5, 0.5 on the anchor point. And then for the position, 0.5, 0, 0.5, 0, just like that. So that's pretty decent sizing, but we obviously want to change that a little bit. So let's go ahead and stretch this out. We want it to kind of extend further than the click buttons, so we give it a little bit more room on the left and the right. And then additionally for the height, we do want it to be a little bit taller than the buttons on the left. And then for the height, we want it to be a little bit above and below the buttons on the left. So that looks pretty good. Now I think the sizing is pretty good, but we might make some more adjustments to it in a little bit. Anyway, for the positioning, let's make sure that it's still perfectly centered, which is on the x-axis. And for the y, I'm fine with it not being perfectly centered on the y. We do want it to be a little bit above the clicker buttons on the bottom, so I think that's perfectly fine to not have it perfectly centered on the y-axis. The next thing that we want to do is add a UI corner directly to that frame. For the UI corner, we're just going to set it to like maybe 0.1, 0 for right now. Oh, that is way too much. Maybe 0.02, and I think that actually looks pretty good. Then for the frame, we want to adjust the background color to be sort of like a dark blue, just like that. Next, what we're going to do is throw a text label directly inside of here, and we're going to rename this to title. Now for the text, it's going to say Rebirth, just like that. We're going to set the text to scaled. For the text color, it's actually going to be white. For the background transparency, we want to set that to 1 because we don't want there to be a background. For the font, we're going to set that to Gotham, and then we're also going to make that bold. And now we got to play around with the sizing a little bit. So I'm just going to set that to 0.1, 0, 0.1, 0, just so that it's scaled. And now we can kind of freely move it around and position it how we want it to be. Now for the positioning, we're of course going to want it to be centered. So for the X anchor point, we're going to set that to 0.5. And then for the X position, we're going to set that to 0.5 as well, so that it's centered on the X axis. For the Y, we don't want centered. We actually want it more towards the top. So something like that, I honestly think that's pretty good. We might want to make the text label a little bit smaller, but I think that's probably pretty good. Now that we've made a little bit of progress, it's always a good opportunity to go into the test tab, click on the device, and see what your UI looks like on different devices to make sure that everything's set to scaled and everything's working properly. The only issue with this is that it seems to stretch a little bit further down on the mobile view, but that's not too big of a deal because eventually we're going to add a UI constraint to this frame, but we're not going to do that right now. With that being said, everything is looking fine on the other devices, so we can keep moving on. The next thing we want to do is duplicate the title, and then we're going to rename this to Rebirths, and the text is actually going to display how many rebirths the player has. So it's going to say rebirths, semicolon, and then the amount of rebirths that the player actually has. So we'll just say like 100 million, for example. Then for the positioning, we want it to appear below the title, obviously. So we're going to try to just kind of move it down like this. So I think that positioning is pretty good. The next thing we're going to do is kind of extend this text label a little bit on the x-axis, just like that. And then we want it to appear a little bit smaller. I'm not sure exactly how much smaller though, but I think that might be pretty good. And I think that's pretty much perfect. So let's go ahead and center this on the x-axis again, just like that, which is great. Now that we have that text label all sorted out, we're going to go ahead and add a text button directly to this, and we're going to rename this to exit. Then for the text, it's actually going to be set to blank. For the background color, we want this to be sort of a red, so you can kind of do any red you want, or if you want their red specifically, I think that's the exact one that they're using. And then of course for the size, we want to adjust that to scaled, so let's just go ahead and set it to something random, and then we'll resize it ourselves. Now let's go ahead and move the button over to like the top right corner sort of a thing. We want to move it a little bit further over, so I think that positioning is pretty good. We might want to make it just a little bit taller. I think like that might be good. Then we'll add a UI corner directly to this as well, and we're going to set that to, I don't know, we always start off with 0.1, and I think that actually looks pretty good for that. I'm not even going to lie. Next, we'll duplicate the title text label, put that inside of the exit button, and then rename this to X. Then for the text, we're going to set that to X as well. For the size, we're going to set that to like 0.95, 0, 0.95, 0, and then we want to make sure that we center this as well, which it seems to mostly be already centered, so we just have to adjust it a little bit. But anyway, that looks pretty good. And now we have our exit button, which I think looks pretty perfect. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add another frame inside of this frame, and we're going to rename that to instructions. For the sides, let's of course put this to scaled, so just set it to anything random just like that. And now for the positioning, we want it to be a little bit below the Rebirth text label, so I think that's actually pretty good positioning. What we can then do is kind of resize it a little bit. I think we want it to be just like a little bit larger than this text label sort of a thing, so we're just kind of dragging it down a tiny bit. That might even be good right there. I think we'll try it with that height. So now let's just drag it out a little bit more, and I think that's pretty good sizing. So let's make sure that we center it on the x-axis, so 0.5 and 0.5, just like that. We're going to throw a UI corner inside of here as well, setting the corner radius to 0.1 seems pretty good. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this title text label, put that directly inside of instructions, and you can leave the name or you can rename it to instructions. The naming of it really doesn't matter. Then for the text, we're actually going to set this to click a button to rebirth, exclamation mark. And now for the sizing, really, we can actually just kind of pull this and then resize it just like that. We don't want it to be as tall. We want it to be a little bit smaller, so I think that would probably be pretty good. Then we want to make sure that we center it on both the X and the Y, so 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. For the text color, we actually want to set it to the background color, so just like that. And now I think that actually looks pretty good. If you wanted to, you could stretch this out further, but you don't need to. I think I actually might stretch the frame out just a little bit more, so I think that's pretty good. Let's just make sure that we center it again, and there we go. What we're then going to do is we're going to actually duplicate this instructions frame right here, and we're going to rename this to rewards. Then inside of here, we can actually delete the UI corner, and we're going to set the background transparency of this frame to 1 because we don't want to have any background. For the instructions text label, we're actually going to set the text color of this from the background color to white, so just like that. Now let's go ahead and reposition this frame a little bit, so let's actually just move it down, and that positioning is actually pretty nice. So 0.4 on the Y. I'm not sure if we want to make this a little bit taller, but we're going to try it for right now. We'll see how it goes. So for the first text label, we're going to rename this to reward 1. And then for the text, we're actually going to set this to 1 rebirth equals 1 clicks multiplier. There we go. Now for the sizing of this, we actually want to set the Y sizing to 0.5. And then I think for the X, we could probably just set that to 1 because we want it to be the entire X radius. After that, we're going to actually add a UI list layout to this. We'll set the horizontal alignment to center as well as the vertical alignment. Then we can duplicate the reward 1 text label, set that, rename that to reward 2. Now the text of this second label is actually going to be 1 rebirth equals 10 gems, just like that. Then for both these labels, we actually want to set the text alignment to be left on the X alignment. Now that we've done that, we actually want to shrink this frame a little bit. So we're basically going to adjust the size of the frame to be right where the multiplier text is. We don't want to make it too small to actually start adjusting the text, so that looks pretty good. We're then going to want to make sure that we recenter the frame, so we're going to set that to 0.5 just like that. Now the next thing we actually have to do is add an image label to this rewards 2 text label right here, and we're going to rename this to icon. Now for the image, we want to go to our asset manager, and then we want to grab the gems currency icon. So let's go ahead and copy the ID to clipboard, and then for the image, we're going to set it directly to that. We can close our asset manager. We're going to set the background transparency of the icon to 1. For the scale type, we're of course going to set that to fit. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to kind of do something a little hacky with the image. Basically, we want this image to be perfectly aligned in the text, and we basically want it to always be after the equal sign and before the 10 gems text. And the way to accomplish this is a little bit hack. So what we need to do for the image label, we need to adjust the sizing. For the sizing, we're going to set the X scale to 0.1, and then for the Y, we're going to set that to 1, so that's the entire height of the text label. Then for the positioning, we're going to try to set this to like 0.36, and then for the Y, it's going to be 0, just like that. And now that actually looks pretty good, but what we then need to do is we need to adjust this text a little bit. So inside of here, we're just going to add an extra space, see if that works. Okay, we want it to be a little little bit more. Okay, we want to add a little bit more spacing to that, so maybe like 2 more. And I think that actually looks pretty perfect. So now that we're done with that, what we then want to do is add a scrolling frame to this frame, and we're going to rename that to container. Now for the sizing of this, we of course want it to be scaled, so let's just go ahead and set it to scaled real quick. Perfect. Now we can move this around a little bit. We of course want it to be a little bit below the rewards frame, so let's just go ahead and drag it out just like that. We're also going to drag it out a little bit on the left, so that is pretty good. I think we might want to make it a little bit taller. I don't know. We'll see. I think that's actually pretty good because there still is a little bit of spacing between these two frames. We could make it a little bit taller, but I don't know if that's the best idea. For the positioning, we of course want to make sure that's centered on the x-axis, so 0.5, 0.5. Boom. For the background transparency, that's going to be 1 because we don't want there to be any background. For the border, we want to make sure we set that to 0 so we get rid of that ugly little pixel next to the scroll wheel. For the vertical scroll bar inset, we want to set that to always, and I think that's pretty good. Then inside of the container, we're going to add a UI grid layout, and we'll also add a text button to this as well. So for the UI grid layout, for the cell size, we're going to set the X scale to 0.475, 0, and then for the Y, we're going to try 0.075, so just like that. The reason that we're setting it to 475 is because we basically want it to be half of the X radius, but we also want to be able to add some padding to it as well, so that's why we're not setting it to like 0.5 or 0.49, and we can always adjust the sizing as well. So for the padding, we're going to try to set that to 0.025, 0, 0.01, 0, so just like that. And now if we duplicate this a couple of times, we can see that the padding and the sizing of them is actually pretty good. The next thing we want to do is inside of the UI grid layout, we want to make sure that we set the horizontal alignment to center, and now that's looking pretty decent so far. So let's go ahead and delete the extra text buttons and just leave 1. Then we can rename this to template. We're going to set the background color of this to a green, and I'm going to use that green right there. For the text, we're actually going to set that to blank because we don't want any text on here right now. And then inside of here, we're going to add a UI corner to this. We'll start the corner radius with 0.1, and I think that's actually pretty perfect as well. And then we need to add some text labels to this. So we're actually going to duplicate the title text label, drag that directly inside of the template, rename this to Rebirth. For the text, it's actually going to say 1 Rebirth. And now we've got to adjust the sizing a little bit. So we're probably going to make this like 0.5 on the y-axis, so let's see. Size, we can set the x-axis to like 0.95 really. I'm fine with it being pretty much the entire width. For the y, we want it to probably be about 0.475. Maybe we could make it 0.5. We'll see. For the positioning, we want to make sure that's centered on the x-axis just like that. And then we could probably set the position on the y to just 0 so that it appears like that. Additionally, we actually want to set the stroke transparency to not 1, but maybe like 0.5. Then we're going to duplicate this text label, rename it to cost, and then we're going to set the text to cost semicolon 200.00M. That's just a random price range, but I'm setting it to 200.00M because that's sort of one of the largest numbers that will be displayed in here. So it's good to see it from that perspective. Now for the positioning of this, we really only have to adjust the Y, and we're probably going to set that to like 0.5 so that it appears on the bottom half of the bun. And for the text color, we actually want this to be a yellow. So there we go. Now what we're going to do is duplicate this template, and we're going to rename this to unlimited. And the reason for that is because in their rebirth menu, one of the buns is an unlimited rebirth bun, and usually inside of the containers, we only ever have a template and we don't ever make anything else inside of there. But for this one, it's going to be a little bit different. So for the background color of this bun, they have it as a blue, so just like that. And really, we could delete the cost text label and probably just use this one text label right here. And we're going to make it a little bit smaller on the x-axis, and we'll set the text to unlimited rebirth, just like that. And then we of course want it to be positioned in the center, so even including on the y-axis as well, just like that. So we're pretty much finished with that unlimited bun. Now the thing is, with this bun right here, there's one thing that we haven't done yet, and that's actually add an icon directly next to the cost. Now the thing is that when it comes to adding icons like that, it becomes really hacky and pretty much requires scripting to keep everything aligned and to keep everything looking good on all devices. So considering the amount of effort that it takes to get it to work and look nice on all devices, in my opinion, the amount of effort that's required to make this look good is not worth the end result of just having the icon appear there, but we're going to do it anyway. I'm only telling you guys this because I think it's worth knowing that realistically, including this image is going to add another level of complications to creating this GUI and maintaining it. With that being said, we're going to continue with it though. So we're going to go inside of our rewards, grab this icon image right here, and paste that directly inside of the cost label, just like that. Now we actually want to modify this image, so let's go inside of our asset manager, and we want to make sure that we grab the yellow click icon, and I think we want to grab the clicks boost icon, so let's go ahead and set the image to that, just like that. Yep, that's the icon that we want. Perfect. Now the way that I figured out how to actually align images with text was from this dev forum post, and I'll leave a link down below in the description to it so that you guys can check it out for yourself. But basically, with this image label, we need to adjust its positioning now based on this text label. So with the image label, what we need to do is we need to adjust the anchor point, and we're going to set the X to 1 and the Y to 0.5, just like that. Now for the positioning, we want to set the scale to 0.5 and on the y-axis to 0.5 as well, just like that. And the final thing that we need to do is mess with the positioning, and we actually want to adjust the X offset. So for example, if we just adjust the X offset and we just set that to 10, we can see that the image moves a little bit to the right. So let's go ahead and keep adding a little bit more to this. Let's try 70. We're almost there. I think 80 might be good. Okay, just a little bit more. Maybe we'll try like 87.5. I think 88 is pretty perfect. Okay, so now that we've done that, what we then need to do is we need to click on this icon, we need to go to the plugin, and we need to use the auto scale light plugin. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on unit conversion. Then when this pops up, what we want to do is we want to adjust the position and click on scale. So then if we check the position again, we can actually see that the positioning of this is set to 0.999 and there is no offset position anymore. So that looks good. But when this actually kind of becomes a little bit of a headache is when we create more labels. So let's say for instance that we adjust the cost text label. Let's just say that we set it from 200.00 million to maybe, I don't know, like 20.00 million. And when we do that, we can see that the image is no longer lined up with the text label, so it appears way further than it should. So to maintain this and make sure that the icon stays with the text, we're actually going to have to script this and adjust the position each time. So for instance, if we adjust the offset position again, let's say like -5, we can now see that it appears closer. And then what we have to do again is we have to use the unit conversion and adjust the position to scale again. So now if we check the position, we can see that the position has been updated just like that. So that's why I was trying to say that this icon adds a lot more effort to maintaining and keeping this GUI looking good. Also, one more thing, for the unlimited button, we actually want to set the layout order of this to a very high number because it seems like in Clicker Simulator, this button always appears at the very bottom of the list, so players have to scroll all the way down to the bottom to actually see it. So that's why we set the layout order to be something really high so that it always appears at the end. Now, one of the final things that we're going to do is duplicate the instructions frame right here, and we're going to rename this to tip. Now for the text, we're going to set it to tip, semicolon, buy more Rebirth buttons in the Rebirth shop. Exclamation mark, just like that. Then for the text, we basically are going to flip these around. So the text color is actually going to be white. The background color of the frame is actually going to be the same color as that background of that frame. And then for the positioning, we actually want it to appear off of this frame. So we might try like 1.1, and that's a little bit too far. So let's go ahead and do like 1.15. Okay, and I think that looks pretty good. And we can also adjust the sizing of this a little bit. So realistically, we can make this like a little bit smaller. I think that's pretty good, but we want it to be the entire width of this. So we're going to stretch it out just like that. And I think honestly, we might want to adjust the positioning a little bit more, try to make it a little bit closer to the other one, maybe like 1.012. And I think that might be good. I don't know. I'm going to set to like 1.01, and that's very close. And I think that's good. For the text label, you could even rename this to tip if you wanted to. And then maybe for the size, we could adjust it to be larger if we wanted to. And I don't think we should make it the entire width, but maybe if we try like 0.95, I think that would be good. So there we go. Now, the only other thing that I'm seeing is that we probably want to move this frame up a little bit so that's not overlapping our click buttons. Let's try to set this to like 0.45, and I think that actually looks pretty good. The final thing that we want to do is click on this frame, go to our plugins. Using the auto scale light plugin, we want to add a constraint directly to this. Then we can click on test, and we can use a different device to see how it looks from a different device. And now it looks pretty wonky. So to fix this, what we want to do is highlight the UI aspect ratio constraint. Then we want to adjust the aspect type to scale with parent size. And for the dominant axis, we want to change this to height. And by doing that, we can see that this appears almost perfectly on the mobile view. And if we go back to our normal view, it looks like normal. The only thing that doesn't seem perfect when we go to the mobile view is the little icon right here. The thing is though, is that I'm really not sure if we're able to get that icon to be perfect on every single device. It doesn't look terrible. It just needs a tiny bit more spacing though, of course. But aside from that one icon, I think the rest of this is pretty perfect. Now that we've created the Rebirth menu, the final thing that we need to do is basically add something similar to our currency display on the left, which will display the amount of rebirths that the player currently has. So to accomplish this, we're going to go into the left screen GUI into the frame, and then we're going to duplicate the currency frame. Then we're going to rename this to rebirths, and now we can start to make some adjustments to this. So for the size, for the Y scale, we're going to set that to like 0.1 and see how that looks. And I think that honestly is probably tall enough. What we're then going to do is go inside of here. We're going to grab the currency and amount objects out of here and drag that directly inside of the rebirths frame. Then we can delete the UI grid layout and the clicks and the gems frame just like that. Then what we want to do is go to our UI list layout and add a little bit more padding to these. So we're going to try like 0.03, and I think that might be good enough. What we're then going to do is rename this image label from currency to holder. Then we'll go inside of our asset manager, and we want to grab the rebirth icon small underscore background. So grab that ID. For the image, we're going to set it to that. For the background transparency, we're going to set that to 1. For the scale, we want to make sure that we set that to fit, not stretch. For the size, we'll set the Y to 1. And then I think for the X, we'll set it to like 0.2. So there we go. That looks pretty good. For the positioning, it is centered on the Y, which is good. Let's make sure that we set it to 0 on the X so that it's all the way to the left. Then inside of here, we can delete this UI corner. We can actually duplicate duplicate that image label, put it inside of itself, and rename this to icon. Then for the image itself, we can actually grab the rebirth icon small and set that as the image, just like that. We can then close our asset manager. So for the size of this icon, we're actually going to try to set it to like 0.55 on the X scaled and 0.55 on the Y scaled. And then we want to make sure that we center it as well. So 0.5, 0.5, and then 0.5, just like that. And now that we look at it, it is centered and that does look good. It does look a little bit small, so we might actually increase it. So what we're going to do is in the Rebirth frame, let's go ahead and look at the sizing of this. Maybe we'll try to set the sizing for the Y to like 0.15, so that it is a little bit larger. Although that might be too large. I don't know. We could try like 1.25, and that's still pretty decent. Rather than adjusting the padding any further, what we might want to do is we might want to add some UI padding to this ourselves so that we don't have to adjust the UI list layout. So for the padding on this, maybe we want to add a little bit of padding to the top, like 0.1, and that just helps give a little bit of spacing to this. Now, I think rather than adjusting the padding on the UI list layout, what I think is better to do is maybe adjust the currency labels themselves. So we're going to try to set them to, instead of 0.5, maybe like 0.495, so that they won't overlap their frame, because as we can see, they are actually a little bit larger than the frame size itself. So if we set them to 0.45 and look at the frame again, we can actually see that they no longer extend past the frame itself. And with that actually allows us to reset the UI list layout padding to like 0.1 if we want to, or you can leave it at 0.03 or 0.02, whatever you want to. Either way, it's looking good. So back to the Rebirth frame. For the amount label, we want to set the size of this to be actually 0.8 on the X-axis, and on the Y, we probably want it to be 1. And we're going to adjust the text to say Rebirth, and we'll just set it to like 100.00M, just like that. Now for the stroke transparency, we're actually going to set that to like 0.8 because we want to have a little bit of a stroke to it. Then for the positioning, we're going to set the X scale to 0.2, and for the Y, we want to set the anchor point to 0.5 and the Y scale to 0.5 as well, so it appears in the center, just like that. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good. If we want to, we can check how it would look on different devices, and it looks fine. And it doesn't seem like there's any issues on different devices, so I think that's pretty good. I also just updated the text label to see how it would look with different numbers in there. I'm also not sure if I mentioned, but you want to make sure that you set the text X alignment to left. The reason that's already set to left is because we duplicated it from this clicks frame, and it was already set to left because that's how they're set up as well. And that's a very important thing. Otherwise, it probably would look a little bit weird. So with that all being said, that's going to be it for this episode. In the next episode, we'll obviously get around to start scripting the Rebirth GUI and everything that relates to that. Anyways, hopefully you guys did enjoy the video. If you guys did, make sure you smash the like button, also the subscribe button, and turn post notifications on if you want to get notified when I upload more Roblox development content. Of course, I have a Patreon if you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I made during this episode. There's a link down below the description, and you guys go and check that out. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video.